Dr. Craig, it's really easy to get lost in YouTube when you start watching videos, then you click another one and another one and another one. But some of our listeners have sent us some YouTube videos, some short ones, shorter segments that they would like for you to comment on. And this is from Roger Penrose, Emeritus Rouse Ball Professor of Mathematics at Oxford. You've quoted him in your work as well. Anything you want to say about Roger Penrose?
Well, just that he is one of the great mathematical physicists of our age, indeed of all time. He, with Hawking, formulated the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorem that established the inevitability of a Big Bang singularity at the beginning of time and space in the standard general relativistic model of cosmology. Universally respected physicist and mathematician.
He's interviewed by Robert Kuhn of Closer to Truth, a program you've been on as well in this. And he's being asked what things really exist. Some of this touches on your work as well. Here's the video.
Roger, if I ask the question, what things really exist, to most scientists, they would say, the physical world, that's it. Why'd you ask me such a silly question?
Stop.
Yeah.
Now, notice what Kuhn is talking about there. He's talking about materialism or physicalism. In fact, many philosophers would not identify the physical world as a thing that exists. They would say that is just your agglomeration mentally of all of the individual physical things that exist. Some would even say that the only things that exist are elementary particles, which then get shaped in different ways to make people and horses and chairs and buildings and planets. But that those things don't really exist. What really exists is just these elementary physical particles that are differently shaped or configured. So don't take with too great seriousness the idea that all that exists is just the physical world. What he really means there is everything that exists material or physical.
Well, I think often people take the view that there is another kind of reality, which is the mental reality. Certainly philosophers might take that view, and some would even regard the mental world as being in some sense primary. The physical world is somehow to be thought of as a construct from mentality. I don't particularly like that view, but in my view you have to think of a third one. I'm sometimes accused of being not just a dualist but actually a trialist, which is even worse, you see.
Now, what's very significant here is that Penrose implicitly affirms the truth of dualism. He says, I'm not just a dualist, but a trialist, which implies that he is a dualist. Mm-hmm. That is to say, he believes that in addition to physical reality, there is a kind of mental reality or mind that is as real as the physical stuff that makes up the world. So that's highly significant, I think, that he is affirming here the reality of the mental. And he's going to affirm now a third realm of reality, which will have to do with the existence of mathematical objects.
Some point of view. But I think it's just a useful way of talking about things. In particular, mathematics seems to have its own kind of existence. It's very important in understanding the physical world, that our way of describing the physical world, certainly at its most precise, has to do with mathematics, and there's no getting away from that. And that mathematics has to...
Now, what that is an expression of the indispensability argument for mathematical objects. You notice he says there's no getting away from that. That is to say, when we do physical science, you can't get away from referring to mathematical objects of various sorts that are familiar to the mathematical physicist. And therefore, he says these things must exist. There must be these mathematical objects. Now, what's important to understand here, Kevin, is that there's a difference between being a realist about mathematical truth and being a realist about mathematical objects. You can be both, or you can be one but not the other. So there are many people who are anti-realists about mathematical objects. They don't think that the number 2 exists or that the set of natural numbers exists. But they are realists about mathematical truth in that they think that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and that there are an infinite number of natural numbers. They will affirm mathematical truths, but without mathematical objects. And I think Penrose glosses too quickly from the fact that there are mathematical truths to the existence of mathematical objects. And it will be interesting to see whether or not he endorses some sort of criterion of ontological commitment whereby these truths commit us to the reality of objects, or whether he just will gloss over that. So we'll have to see what he says.
Mathematics seems to have its own kind of existence. It's very important in understanding the physical world, that our way of describing the physical world, certainly at its most precise, has to do with mathematics, and there's no getting away from that. And that mathematics has to have been there since the beginning of time. It has an eternal existence, timelessness really. It doesn't have any location in space, it doesn't have any location in time. Some people would take it not to have any location or not any existence at all, but it's hard to talk about science really without giving mathematics some kind of reality, because that's how you describe your theories in terms of mathematical structures.
Okay, there you see the slide or the gloss that I'm talking about. From the fact that mathematical truth is timeless and not in space, that it's valid eternally, he thinks there needs to be some kind of mathematical existence, and that there must be mathematical objects that these truths refer to. But that's a controversial position that requires some sort of argument to go from mathematical truths to mathematical existence. And so far we haven't heard him make that argument.
It has this also this relation to mentality, because we certainly have access to mathematical truths. But I think it's useful to think of the world as not being a creation of our minds, because if we do, then how could it have been there before we were around? Somehow, if the world has been obeying mathematical laws with extraordinary precision since the beginning of time, well, there were no human beings and no conscious beings of any kind around then. So how can the mathematics have been the creation of minds and still have been there controlling the universe? So,
now this is a good argument against thinking of mathematical truths as the product of human conception. Namely, mathematics has been true forever, long before we arrived on the scene. That's quite right. And I think this is a devastating argument against a view called psychologism, that would say mathematical objects are ideas in people's minds. But notice this wouldn't strike against divine conceptualism, which would say that they're ideas in God's minds, or the creation of God's mind in some way, which would be either an absolute creationism or a divine conceptualism. So it will be interesting to see whether or not he thinks that mathematics could be grounded in the mind of God.
So I think it's very valuable to think of this Platonic mathematical world as having its own existence. So let's allow that and say that there are 3 different kinds of existence, maybe others, but 3 kinds of existence: the normal physical existence, the mental existence, which seems to have, in some sense, even greater reality. It's what we directly are aware of, what we directly perceive, and the mathematical world, which seems to be out there in some sense, conjuring itself into existence. It has to be there.
All right, now notice here he has made this slide that I talked about without justification, from being a realist about mathematical truth to being a realist about mathematical objects. And that requires an argument. In contemporary philosophy of mathematics, it usually involves some sort of criterion of ontological commitment. Namely, that if you assert a truth and you use terms to refer to certain individual things like numbers, or if you say there is or there are certain things, then you're ontologically committed to the things that you say there are or the things that these terms refer to. But that criterion can be challenged and has been challenged by a good number of thinkers today who would want to be objectivists like Penrose about ontological truth, but would question whether or not that implies Platonism with regard to these ontological objects. To make that move, that slide from truth to ontology, you need an argument, and he hasn't given that yet.
And then there's the relationship between these three worlds, which I regard as, all three of them, as somewhat mysterious, or very mysterious. So I think I sometimes refer to this as three worlds and three mysteries. And mystery number one is, how is it that the physical world does in fact accord with mathematics, not just any old mathematics, but very sophisticated, subtle mathematics, to such a fantastic degree of precision. So that's mystery number one. Mystery number two.
So mystery number one is commonly known as the applicability of mathematics. And what makes this a mystery, Kevin, is that this Platonic realm of abstract objects, this third reality he believes in, are causally inert. They stand in no causal relations to anything. So they cannot impact the physical world. So how is it that this Platonic realm of mathematical objects is applicable to the physical universe? The Platonist has no answer to this mystery. By contrast, the theist, whether he be a Platonist or an anti-realist, has an answer to mystery number one. He says that the world exhibits a mathematical structure because it has been designed by God on the basis of such a blueprint. God had a mathematical blueprint or structure in mind, and he has constructed a world built on that blueprint. And so naturally, these mathematical truths then are useful and apply to the world in understanding the way the world is. So the first mystery that Penrose lays out is a mystery indeed for the Platonist, but it's not a mystery for the theist.
So that's mystery number one. Mystery number two is, how is it that when you have physical structures of the right kind, and here I'm referring very specifically to living human, wakeful, healthy brains, probably many other animals, I would say, also have this quality of mentality. And somehow it's evoked when the structures have the right character, whatever that is. So there is mentality seems to have this deep relation to certain kinds of physical structures. And then
That's mystery number two.
That's mystery number two.
Okay. Here is the problem of mind-body dualism. How is it that the mind or the mental is coordinated with these physical structures like the brain? And the question here would be whether theism can shed any light on this. I think this is still an area of open exploration and mystery. But what one can say is that the existence of such minds, which are coordinated with brains in the world, fits into a theistic world much better than it does fit into a naturalistic world. Because on theism, ultimate reality is mental. There is a mind who has created the universe and who has created these physical structures, and these finite minds are simply an imitation on a finite level of the ultimate mind that created the world. Now that doesn't solve the mystery, but I think it does say that this mind-body duality fits into a theistic world much better than it does into a non-theistic world, because at least you've got ultimate reality being mind and creating the physical in a certain way.
Is this where the argument from consciousness comes in at all?
Yes,
why,
that's right.
Why are
That's
our
right.
molecules conscious?
Right. This would be an argument from consciousness and intentionality and so forth, to say that there are minds and that this fits in better with a theistic view of the world than with a naturalistic view of the world.
Okay.
Mystery number 3 has to do with our access to the world of mathematics. And why it's a mystery is perhaps not so clear, but it's something that you certainly can't describe in terms of purely computational activity. There's something outside that involved in our appreciation of mathematics. Even just knowing what the natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can say that, you see, and you can explain to a child, and you can have Sesame Street things with different things, and they get the idea. They know what they're talking about. They know what numbers are. But yet you can't characterize simply by axiomatic procedures what the natural numbers are. There's theorems and logic to say that. Yet how do you know what they are if you can't describe in a finite set of rules what these numbers are? So there is a mystery there too. That's mystery number 3.
This is known as the epistemological objection to Platonism. Namely, if there really are these mathematical objects which are causally unrelated to us, existing beyond time and space, as Penrose says, then how in the world do we know anything about them? How do we know arithmetic or complex mathematics? We have no causal connection with this realm of mathematical objects. I know no more about them than I know about what is happening in some remote village in the Himalayas in Nepal right now. So this is a very common objection to Platonism, that it cannot explain how we know mathematical truth or know about this mathematical realm. And here again, I think theism could help, because it could say that God has created us with a sort of mathematical ability whereby we can grasp mathematical truth. Anti-realism would help too, because on the anti-realist view, you don't have a separate realm of causally inert abstract objects that you're trying to know. I think mathematical truths can be reduced to just logical truths, or to make-believe, in fact. So I think this mystery 3 is a problem for the non-theistic Platonist.
There's another feature about this, which is that in each case it's only a small part of one world which encompasses, seemingly, the entirety of the next world. So, okay, it's only a little bit of mathematics, okay, a very subtle and beautiful and powerful part of mathematics, but there's that whole world of mathematics. If you look at any mathematical journal, pure mathematical journal, it's full of things have absolutely no relevance to physical activity. Okay, maybe the odd thing turns out to have, but most of it, there seems to be no relation to physical reality. And that's not the point of it. You do it because you're interested in mathematics for its own sake. So it's a small part of the mathematical world which seems to encompass the behavior of the physical world. And it's a very small part of the physical world which seems to evoke mentality. Okay, there are far more rocks and things, dead planets around, than there are conscious brains around. So it's only a very small part of that. And it has to be organized in a very subtle and sophisticated way to give rise to mentality, whatever it is. And it's only a small part of our mental activities which relate to mathematics. I think most non-mathematicians would appreciate that more than mathematicians. But even mathematicians are most of the time thinking about other things. So it's only a small part of our mentality. So I like to draw this picture in almost a paradoxical way, you see. Each world is a small part of it, which seems to be
encompass the total of the other.
Right, of the next one as you go around. Okay, there are some prejudices of mine involved in drawing the picture that way, but it seems to be give you a good feeling.
Now, the typical scientific response to that would say, okay, the mental world is just an expression of the physical brain, and so it's an artificial phenomena, and it's not real. It's just something that's evoked by the physical brain, and mathematics is very nice, but it's something that human beings have invented to sort of describe the physical world. So there really is only one world. The other two are kind of derivative or imaginary.
Well, you see, you could take that view, or to a mathematician, you might take that the mathematical world somehow is the one, because somehow it has to be there, you see. It sort of creates itself out of nothing, you see. And it has to be there. And then the physical reality, you might think, has its source in there. Or you might say, well, no, it's mentality. That's where all our knowledge comes.
Now, when he says that the mathematical realm is self-created, that shouldn't be taken literally. What he really means is that it's necessary in its being. It's necessary, timeless, and uncreated, in fact. And I think also you can't take seriously the idea that the physical world derives from this mathematical world because, as I've said, the mathematical realm is causally impotent.
Can't cause anything.
It can't cause anything. Yeah. So you can't derive the physical world literally from the mathematical realm. I think we're seeing here the way in which theism better incorporates all three of these realms in a synoptic, coherent worldview that, apart from theism, tends to fall apart.
Everything ultimately is to do with our consciousness, and everything else is then explained in terms of it. So it isn't clear.
Each one of the worlds can feel its own predominance over the others.
There's something about it. Now here the suggestion is what's called idealism, and that is that the physical world, and I suppose the mathematical world, are derived from human minds. And again, on a human level, that just seems fantastic. As he said, mathematics applied and was true during the Jurassic period, long before we got here. And grounding mathematics in human minds is not going to explain the necessity of mathematical truth, since human beings are contingent. The idea that we somehow caused the physical world to come into existence before we got here would postulate a bizarre form of backward causation that just seems utterly bizarre. So the relation between these realms of reality is incoherent on a non-theistic worldview, it seems evident to me.
Okay. The others.
I think that's right, yes. And it's I'm trying to make it look a little more kind of symmetrical and even-handed. And to a mathematician, the mathematical world has a kind of reality out there. It's if you like, the reality of the mathematical world, the Platonic world, is an expression of the objectivity of mathematics. It's something outside any particular individual. I mean, mathematicians strive for that, you see. They don't often achieve it, you see. You can get things wrong, you can only partially appreciate what's going on. Different mathematicians have different ways of appreciating these things. But there is outside of us something there which is beyond any individual mathematician. It's beyond the totality of all mathematicians.
When you look at these three worlds, you're obviously doing it more than metaphor, but is it just as a description of reality, or is there some sense of real independent existence?
Well, they're not independent, because each one does have this relation to the next, yes, even though each relationship I regard as a mystery. So maybe we will understand these relationships better in the future. I don't necessarily regard this as a sort of ultimate picture. I think that in some sense there are different aspects of reality, and that the true reality in some sense encompasses the whole thing. In fact, I tend to draw the picture in a deliberately paradoxical way. There is this, you look at it and it has this sort of feeling of one of these impossible triangles, you see.
Right.
And that's deliberate.
Escher-like.
Escher-like. It's deliberately impossible that there is another mystery hiding behind that, which is how all three of these worlds can somehow coexist in some deeper reality that's not expressed really in that picture.
Oh, was that it?
That's the end.
I mean, that ending, the incoherence of the view, admitted, Escher-like. These drawings where it appears you're going up the stairs with each staircase and then you're back where you started again. An incoherent view of reality, unless there is a deeper mystery behind all three of these. This is fairly crying out for theism, it seems to me. So this is a wonderful interview. I think it's beautifully explained. The different aspects of reality are beautifully delineated. And
Well, I think
it just cries out for theism to be complete.
And I think that some of these anti-philosophy scientists that are so popular today should take note with Roger Penrose. Because Bill, here's a scientist who reads philosophy.
Yeah.
And he's actually, he's looked into Platonism and abstract objects and these things like that. And so
You're absolutely right, Kevin. I'm listening to this as a philosopher and failing to appreciate that this is a mathematical physicist, not a philosopher. And it is a world apart from the sort of reductionistic physicalism of people like Hawking, Krauss, Mladenov, Dawkins, and the rest. I think you're absolutely right. They should read a good dose of Penrose.